yeah, I'm from Germany. Actually, I'm from Portugal originally, and I'm in Portugal currently, so it's quite multinational, your event. I will talk about balancing tourism and nature protection, the case of the Fehmarn Island. I'm from the Baltic Environmental Forum, but also the city of Fehmarn has inputs to this presentation. And of course, as all the other speakers until now, I was part of the Land Sea Act project, an Interreg funding activity. So looking into the island and starting with a little kind of context, because I was also asked to talk a little bit about MSP in Germany, about marine spatial planning. So when you think about Germany, you have to think always about different regions within Germany, because Germany has a federal kind of structure. So the states, the German federal states, hold quite some power. And when we have these kind of plans that are more overarching through large areas like maritime spatial planning, there are some divisions and there are some things we need to consider. So of course, Germany has the Baltic Sea and the North Sea to deal with. And as a very interesting structure when it comes to planning. So everything that is about the exclusive economic zones, it's done by the Federal Ministry of Interior. So this is taken care not by the states, but by the Federal Ministry of Interior, and are just concerning the economic exclusive economic zones. So everything else that is territorial sea area, then that falls within the Federal Maritime and Hydrographic Agency. They are the responsibles to kind of harmonize, coordinate the elaboration of maritime spatial planning. I see some, okay, maritime spatial planning. But this federal agency just coordinates and gives advices and tries to make people do more or less the same thing. But when you go to the aspects of deciding on objectives and deciding on many of the implementations, these are actually under the jurisdiction of the states themselves. So if you look at the Baltic Sea area where Fehmarn Island is located, which is the spot there that you see on the map, the icon, it falls under the Schleswig-Holstein state. And here the responsible for the maritime spatial planning is the state chancellery itself. If you go to Mecklenburg-Vorpommern, so a little bit more to the east of Germany, then there is the Ministry of Energy. And if you go to Lower Saxony on the North Sea, then that is the Ministry of Agriculture. So when you deal with maritime spatial planning in Germany, you're very much kind of looking at from the point of view of one of the states, and the states kind of give emphasis to what they would like to have: energy, agriculture, and other issues. So as I said, the Fehmarn Island is on the Baltic Sea, on the north, pointed there on the map, and it falls under the Schleswig-Holstein state. And here, when you look at the guiding principle for the maritime spatial planning and territorial sea use of this state, what is the guiding principle is that sustainable spatial development should bring both the social and economic demands of the region, of the population, but this has to be in line with the ecological functions of the space where this economic activity takes place. So that's the core principle guiding the maritime spatial planning for this region in the Baltic Sea. Then there's other focuses for the North Sea and so on. So breaking this down, different uses of the coastal zone should therefore be balanced and adjust to each other, always taking in mind this guiding principle. And of course, integrated coastal zone management should play a role in guaranteeing that this balance is achieved. In terms of time, the maritime spatial planning for this region took in effect in 2010, so already some time ago, and it has been amended early May in 2019. So there's a process of continuing update and revisiting the spatial planning of this region. So going now to the island. So the island is in the Baltic Sea, and the objective of the study within the Land Sea Act project, well, one of the objectives of this report, I will just focus on a few issues. One of the objectives of the report for this island was to observe if there are some spatial conflicts between economic activities that are important for Fehmarn and aspects of nature protection always in the core of the guiding principle for the region. And if so, if there are spatial conflicts, what strategies can be developed to mitigate these conflicts? And then I just will introduce just one slide or two, not many, on relevant impacts from the climate change perspective in that island, because it is perceived in the region that climate change will become an important topic for the island also itself in the future. But the core of the presentation is on the first two points. So moving on a little bit now about the island in the Baltic Sea. This is the Fehmarn Island. It's a very popular holiday destination at the German Baltic coasts. It enjoys one of the longest or most days of sunshine in Germany. So German sunshine, yeah, always relative, but within the region, it is quite sunny. It has experienced the island an increase in overnight stays. So tourists that go there and stay more than 1 or 2 nights to visit the island. In 2019, 2.5 million stays were observed in the island. So it's not 2.5 million people, is one person. If it stays 3 nights, it counts as 3. So it's overnight stays. And mostly the people go for the issues of water sport, for camping and associated coastal recreation. There is some infrastructure, some rail, some ferries connecting to Denmark and so on. But the core activity of the economic activity is camping, water sports, so all the tourism related with water sports. There's also a strong presence of agricultural land use, as we will see. And also about 20% of the coastal line is under protection, either under nature protection, either from some German point of view, bird directive, nature 2000. So altogether, about 20% of the island of the coastline falls under protection of nature of some sort. And there has been also, and stakeholders and the population has also been relating to this. Over the last decade, there has been significant warming of the winters. So winters are not so harsh as they used to be, which might open some possibilities on the tourism side. And there has been some strong warmings of the summer, which poses some impacts to the population, as we will also see very briefly. As I said, the main uses, the agricultural land has a big presence on the island. If we look only at the coastal strip, so the coastal area going from the shoreline to 250 meters inland, if we just look at that part of the land as in the picture on the right below, we can see that agricultural covers 34% of this of the total coastal area, so to say. That's a big piece of land that is constrained because it has high economic value, and it's very characteristic of the island. Then there are open green spaces, which is about 20%. So everything that is just open spaces, green, nature protected areas, and so on. There's quite a lot of campsites for the size of the island. About 7% of the coastal land is covered by campsites. And just for you to have an idea, it's more or less the same as that the highland has of beaches. So the area is more or less comparable. And then there's some urban, and there's hardly any forest, so very low ecological value on the side of the forest. So we went to the Fehmarn Island and we talked with the city there, and they were concerned to look where there would be some kind of conflicts between the nature protection aspects and the economic aspects. And since the island is so visit in terms of water sports, we looked at places, or we start looking at places that were very kind of hotspots in terms of water sports. This is a place on the south of the island, southwest, called Ortabucht, and it's full of surf schools, and it's a very popular place for kite surfers and for windsurfers. The people are protected from strong winds. You can have kind of schools teaching beginners to surf, and if you are a more experienced kite surfer or windsurfer, you can go outside of the bucht of the bay. And there are kind of many surf areas, for example, surf area A and surf area B, which are regularly visited by surfers. But interesting enough, also in this area, really close to the surf areas A and B and others, this is just an example, there are nesting areas for birds, which are, some are protected, some are not, but it's also very common to find birds nesting in the surroundings of these locations, as you can see in some of the pictures there. And not only birds, the area is rather shallow, so the water can penetrate quite a little bit into the water, meaning that there's quite some vegetation growing there on the shallow waters, particularly on the nature reserve on the left, but also throughout the areas on the right where the surf areas are. So the concern was, when we look there, if the surf activity that overlaps spatially with the birds nesting and with the shallow waters vegetation, if the surfing activity taking place there would cause a threat to this vegetation or to this habitat or not. And focusing now only on the vegetation, because that's more easy than the birds. Focusing on the vegetation, what we set up to was to look into the seafloor, shallow seafloor until 1.50 meters, and collect and look what kind of vegetation is there, its health, its coverage, its diversity. Are there many plants or just one sort of plants, or are there more? Is it a lot of covered by vegetation? Is not so covered by vegetation? And of course, we looked in surf area A and B on the transects that you see in yellow. We sampled things there in the seafloor. And also we needed some kind of reference, because just looking at the surf areas will tell us nothing if the ecosystem is in good health or not. So we had to look at the reference area within the nature reserve, which you see also there highlighted in yellow, which we surveyed. And by comparing the results from surf area A and B with the results from the nature reserve, we assume that if there's any difference on health, on diversity of the vegetation, then this is caused mostly likely by surf activity, because the region is the same in regard to all other aspects of water, of soil, of structure, of sediments and stuff like that. So looking into the results, again, the map on the left for reference, here a little bit on the bottom what was done. There was surveys going, diving into the water until 1.50 meters depth and collecting what kind of vegetation was there, was it how many different types of species and so on. Here I'm just reporting on a very simple indicator, which is what percentage of the seafloor was covered with vegetation and which percentage was not. So if you have 100% in the graphic on the top right, everything on the seafloor, all the area that the diver could see was covered by vegetation. If you have 0, nothing was there, it was just basically sand. And if you see the columns on blue and orange, those are the results for the surf areas A and B at different water depths. And the bar in the green is the results for the nature reservation. As you can see, basically 2 things. As you go lower in depth, your percentage of vegetation coverage increases until 0.75 meters. And then as the light cannot penetrate more into the water, the vegetation starts to decrease. This is not the most important finding. The most important finding is that at the depths of 0.5 meters and 75 meters, 0.75 meters, there's very little difference between the percentage of vegetation that was covering the seafloor in surf areas A and B and the ones that's covering the seafloor in nature reserve. So they are quite the same. There are differences, but they are not very strong differences that one could see empirically that the surf activity is harming the vegetation there. And that was exactly the finding, that no significant difference was found between the coverage of macrophytes, so of this vegetation, shallow water vegetation in the surf areas and those in the nature reserve. Therefore, current pressure of surf activities at Orterbucht does not pose an existential threat to the shallow water vegetation in the region, but it was recommended as a kind of precautionary measure to limit the water sports to not expand in the region the water sports activity, because we know that now the limits are being observed. There's not a big threat, but yeah, for precautionary measures, the levels it was suggested that should be kept. So another, maybe a more fast example, we looked at another region, now in the north, again with a nature reserve on the left, with some birds nesting also highlighted in these ovals there. And here there was a lot of conflicts, or I mean, there was a lot of activity of people using the area for bathing, using the area for kite surfing, using the area for going with bicycles around, and you have the birds trying to nest there in the middle of all of this confusion, which might cause some problems. We didn't run a quantitative analysis like before for the shallow water, because the birds are much harder to quantify and to observe. But we interviewed stakeholders, so we didn't run a kind of an empirical analysis, but we talked with stakeholders, and they told us that, yeah, this place is very popular also for kite surfing and windsurfing, also for bathing. Sometimes, said a windsurfer reporting on the kite.de webpage, sometimes the place looks like a beehive because there are many surfers going in and out. And of course, there are conflicts with surfers sailing into the bathing area. Nevertheless, people are also very keen in saying that the attitude of people are now very much better to each other, so they don't do it very often, and if they do it, if the surfer comes into the bathing area, it's just because he didn't notice or there was some kind of wind blowing and so on. So this was the second area that we assessed in terms of conflicts. In order to resolve this, the city of Fehmarn decided that having kind of an app that people have on the phone, surfers particularly, that would tell them if a surf spot is overcrowded or not, or is at risk of getting overcrowded, would be very good. And in the Land Sea Act project itself, we didn't develop the app, but we developed the database that might help to develop this app. So the principle of the app is that we assess how many parking places are near the surf spot and count these. And as the people go in and the surf spot starts to, and the parking starts to fill and the surf spot starts to fill up, the app will try to divert people away from this surf spot to another one that is more free. So we don't block anyone of going to the surf spot. We try to incentivize that they go to a surf spot that is more free than the one that they want. So the core principle of the application would be to incentivize the use of parking spaces in the vicinity of surf spots according to the spot's sustainable capacity. So we developed some kind of illustrations how this could work. For example, from left to right, the app doesn't exist, okay? This is just a concept and a prototype. From left to right, the surfer would see that the kite surf spots are at 60% full capacity. Let me see in the map on the right, where can I go? You see that some spots are in green in the middle, some spots are in red or in yellow in the map in the middle. And then if you would click the red one, the app would tell him, yeah, you can go here, but please consider that there's this ecological implications. It will be nice that you go somewhere else. And if you go to somewhere else, to the green ones, for example, you can already pay your parking place in your app. You will have kind of a discount in some shop or get some free offer at the tourist office. Like, try to incentivize that the people move away or don't go preferably to the spots that are already in red. Of course, there are several, this is just a nice idea and the technology is there, but there's some challenges. Technology has always this kind of challenges, and there are several. It's hard to define the capacity of a surf spot, how many people should visit it or how many surfers can visit it. And also, of course, the app cannot function in itself. It has to function with other kind of physical demarcations on the island. And this was done in the Fehmarn Island to place near the nature protection areas, for example, that surfers should go left or right from it. We put stop signs in order to say, okay, from here on, you shouldn't surf, you shouldn't use the area, in order to protect to safeguard the birds, the nesting, and so on. And in addition to this, the Fehmarn city thinks it would be a nice idea to have this app to support the physical infrastructure that is already there. So, leaving a little bit from going away from nature, we also looked at campsites, which are a big source of revenues to the Fehmarn Island. And as you can see here in this very nice illustrative figure, the campsites in Fehmarn, not all, but quite a few, are very close to agricultural areas. We didn't have from the stakeholders that we interviewed from the owners of the campsites themselves, they didn't say that this is a problem, that having the so close the agricultural area is a problem. But when we interviewed tourists, all of them can be from campsites and from other could be surfers and so on, doesn't matter. We interviewed 127 of them, and about half said that reduction of pesticides in Fehmarn Island would make tourism much more attractive. So there is this kind of feeling that something is happening, although we don't know exactly what. But from the answers of the tourists, and because the agricultural area takes such a huge space there, we do think there might be some conflicts being underlined here, although people are not noticing. People might not be noticing because, for example, when you use machinery or pesticides in the agriculture, there might be kind of drift of pesticides into inland, but you simply don't notice because they either don't smell, they don't have a color, and so on and so forth. But they might be still being deposited in the nearby of the fields, but you just don't notice. And the research supports this, as you can see here on this plot. On the x-axis is the distance to the application of the fertilizer or of the pesticide, and on the y-axis is the percentage of volume that can be found, even at 30 meters distance from the agricultural field. There is the possibility there is kind of spray accumulation of pesticides and so on. So people might not be seeing it, but things might be happening. It's kind of a hidden conflict, so to say. And in order to safeguard this, we looked at satellite imagery, and we look at campsites that were in the neighborhood of these areas, and we tried to kind of demarcate these 30-meter buffer zones that should be attended to in order to safeguard a little bit the campsite from potential spray accumulation. And I will skip the, yeah, and this is what we did. We tried to integrate in Fehmarn Island the concept of flowering meadows. Flowering meadows means that the agricultural land, part of it will not be cultivated with the crop, and therefore you don't need to fertilize or use pesticides on it. And instead you will kind of seed flowers or more natural vegetation that is good for insects and so on. And the agriculture for the owner of the agricultural land, for the piece of land that he or she does not cultivate, he will get a compensation for it. So we did this with some farmers there, and the feedback was good. And the idea is that if you plant these flowering meadows in the edges of your farmland, you safeguard then the campsite of potential pesticides that might drift there. So there is also a number of challenges associated with this. I can tell more if you want in the discussion. You need to make sure that the seeds are available for the climate that you want to plant, and that the root is not so deep, and that they need to be kind of synergetic with the crop that the farmer is planting, and so on and so on. So finally, in terms of, and I just have one or two more slides, I'll be very fast. In terms of climate impacts, this was not a big focus from the Land Sea Act project perspective, but it was very interesting for Fehmarn Island there, because they perceived that this will be a topic where we need to make more research in the future. So we looked at kind of climate projections into the island, and in the summer months we found a projected warming of 1 to 1.5 degrees following one of the IPCC scenarios by 2030 and 2050, so on the right and on the left and on the right respectively on the plot. We also did a small assessment on the water needs. So if temperatures in the summer go up, there's need more water, and if tourism numbers go up, also the island would need more water. And we estimate already by 2030 that the city would need 10% more water supply in the summer months. It doesn't look much, 10%, but when you put that in cubic meters or kilometers, then that's a huge endeavor. And finally, because it's a coastal area, we did a preliminary assessment of flood risk under sea level rise and storm surges for the Fehmarn Island itself. So just to cut it short, I showed you that marine spatial planning in Germany is kind of a multi-layered institutional component, and it reflects more or less the federal organization and the federal focus. The island of Fehmarn has observed rising levels of tourism and water sport activities. This has led to some but manageable conflicts that have been identified and mapped for particular hotspots. There were ideas on how to evaluate new and existing measures to manage the flow of water sports enthusiasts, for example, using new technologies. I showed you also that there are some quite nice activities that can be done, for example, these flowering meadows with no technology at all, but with engaging stakeholders. And finally, we did kind of some preliminary climate impact assessment of flood risk and water supply, because the city thinks this will be a topic that they will need to put more focus into the future. Okay, and that's my final slide, and I'm happy to receive and answer to questions. Thank you.